I'm Bonnie Gibson. I'm very blessed to be the superintendent of Jefferson County Schools, and we're here tonight to have a discussion about student growth and some of Jefferson County Schools' responses to those things. So if you were here for the fourth grade talent show, then we'll have to redirect you. I am joined tonight by a couple of folks who I simply want to point out that are in the audience and let you know are here. We have our chair of our school board, Mr. Scott Suddeth, couldn't be here tonight due to work purposes, but we have our vice chair here, Ms. Kathy Skinner. We have, Kathy, we need to see you. Ms. Lori Ogden, school board member. I saw Mr. Gary Cable, school board member back here. And our fifth school board member, Mr. Mark Osborne, was unable to join us as well. There are also several Jefferson County School staff people here who will be supporting us throughout this. So just so that everyone knows the format, I think it's important to know expectations. Tonight, we will be here for an hour. I plan on ending at 7 o'clock. In that time, we have about a half an hour set aside for presentation where I want to give you information about Jefferson County Schools, about student growth, and about the process that we plan on going through as a school system to deal with that growth. And then we have several staff members who are here with pens and index cards. And as we go through the evening, if you raise your hand, they're going to bring you a pen and an index card. If you have a question, if you have a concern, if you have something, you'll write it down. They will take those up, and then we'll spend the last half hour answering questions that are sent in or putting out information about process that people might have questions about. Okay? So we'll go ahead and get started for this evening. First and foremost, one of the things is that right now, Jefferson County Schools has 9,207 students in it. We are a rural community, but are growing in a fairly rapid manner. And one of the things that we think is very, very important is to have some good balance. The folks who live in Jefferson choose Jefferson for very, very clear reasons. If they wanted to live in Loudoun, they would move to Loudoun. If they wanted to live in Mingo County, they would move to Mingo. They choose to live here because of the way of life here and the things that they appreciate about it. So as a school system, we think it's important for us to try to maintain all of those things. So when we start looking at growth, because that's what this is about, student growth, when we track our number of students over the last 5 years, we had one very odd year in 14-15. But over the last 5 years, we're averaging about 71 students a year more than we did the year before. At the rate that we're going, by 2027, we will hit 10,000 students. That may sound like a long way away, but in terms of planning for us, it's really not. Planning for growth is a short game and a long game. And by us doing a good job with statistics and with tracking and with the tools that we have, we get better and better at that. So one of the things is that as we've grown over the years, the school system, the staff, the community has done the best job that they could with the tools that they had to deal with growth. We've been growing for decades. But typically in the past, as we've grown, the map that you see right there, which is a map of Jefferson County with the school boundaries outlined and the roads laid on it, that was pretty much the level of data and information and tracking that we had. We'd have a group of kids one year, and we'd count the group of kids that came in next year, see the difference. These days, we have some much more sophisticated tools, both to see where the growth is at and where it's coming so that we can plan in a more effective manner. Now, several of you, I believe, came up here earlier and you saw these maps that were placed up in front of you. So these maps, I want to take a minute and explain because they're tools that we'll be using during this process. The very first map that you see right here is a student density map. If you came up and looked at it and saw the little triangles on it, if you have a child who attends Jefferson County Schools, you're one of those triangles. We have GIS mapping capability where we can put a plot point of every single kid in this county, where they go to school and where they matriculate to up through their feeder patterns. And we have it all electronically to be able to manipulate fairly quickly. And where you see the little sort of red glow around those, that's called a heat map. We're tracking density of students in certain locations, both through the elementary level, the middle school level, and the high school level. Now that gives us a much more intensive picture of where we're at right now, but of course, what we're also very interested in is where we're going to be in the future. So some of the tools that we have to do that, many of you folks have probably seen, if you're very involved in the county commission or in business planning, this map that talks about county growth boundaries. Things that the county has set aside for different types of land use, subdivisions. We've spent many months. We actually started this process back last January, February, and I have to give a lot of due credit to the Jefferson County Planning Department, because they have done a tremendous job of working with us. And when you have an opportunity to come up and walk through this map as well, one of the things that you will see is that we've taken a huge swath of data about many different things. Number one, where all of the planned development is in the county. We can actually go permit by permit and see every piece of land that someone has paid us money to build a house on. So they may not have one there, they may build next year, they may be a developer and build 5 years from now, but eventually there will be a house on that land. We also know what the average occupancy rate is, how many children per household are averaged. We know which pieces of land in Jefferson are already agricultural set aside. They can't be built upon. There isn't going to be a subdivision there. There isn't going to be a business there. We already have places that are built out. They have no further capacity for growth within them. Those are whiteout places. So for each one of these squares that you see on here, all of these 9 different types of mapping, we overlaid them into one enormous program. And then we color-coded that program for within the next 5 years, within the next 10 years, within the next 15 years. These will be the fastest growing places in Jefferson County. Okay? So for all of those, what we're talking about is our capacity. What capacity do we have to serve students right now? The WVSBA is the West Virginia School Building Authority. That's the organization that purchases schools and certifies schools for all of the counties in West Virginia. They have guidelines for how big your school has to be, how many students can be in a classroom. Their recommendation is that schools should operate at 85% of their capacity, which means if you have a school that it says I can hold 100 kids, then you shouldn't go over 85% capacity without planning for growth. All right, and we're going to talk a little bit more about capacity in a moment. When we say capacity, how many people a room will hold? So there are lots of different ways to look at capacity. You can look around this room, and one way to look at capacity is you could count every single seat. If there's 100 seats, there's an 100 capacity. But then there's room up here on the stage, and there's room down here, and there's room in the aisles. Can you count that room? When it comes to schools, they have formulas for counting capacity. They count rooms, and they say, you should be able to put X number of children in this room. And there are some interesting things about how they do that. Number one, they count all of the rooms in a school as if they could run a class in there. A regular homeroom class with 25 kids in it. So at the elementary school, that means there's not an art room, there's not a music room, There's not a computer lab. There are none of those specialized set-aside places. If there's a room and it's big enough to hold 25 kids, it's counted as a classroom. Now, you can do art on a cart. You can put all your bongo drums in a closet and haul them out every hour to a different classroom. It's not how most schools typically operate, but that's how SBA does their capacity counts. Another caveat before we talk about and show the chart for capacity, and I will, let me stop for a minute because I should have said this up front. By close of business on Friday, this PowerPoint, every one of these charts, and I'm sure a stunning video from Mr. Rob Perks, will all be posted online for you to view them. So if you're feverishly taking notes or you want to have all of this will be online for you, okay? So one of the other things to know about capacity is that it's not just school-age children that we serve. West Virginia has an absolutely wonderful ethic about preschool children in that it requires that you deliver preschool services. There are a lot of other states that don't do that. In Virginia, there are wait lists with hundreds of kids who need preschool and don't get it. Here in West Virginia, every child who qualifies for preschool is guaranteed a slot, and that's a beautiful thing. But right now, only about half of the children in Jefferson who qualify for preschool with us actually go to preschool in a school. We don't have enough space in our schools, so we pay for slots in private schools. So they still get their preschool, but not in a Jefferson County public school. Now, that does not cost us any extra money. We give them the exact same amount that we get to serve children. It's simply an indicator that we don't have enough room in our schools for all of the children that we could be serving. So knowing all of that, when you talk about capacity, 85%, when you count out how many seats we have in every single school in this entire school district right now, and how many kids we have and how much we're growing per year, by 2024, we'll hit 85% as an entire school district. That means 85% of every single seat we have is full. There's a kid in it. Again, sounds like a long time, but not really when it comes to planning and building. So here is a slide that will likely generate a lot of interest, and which I'm sure many of you will see over and over again. Basically, it has every single one of our schools, and then this very first row talks about our September 1 count. We count I'll send you a copy of it, honey. You ain't got to take a picture. That's okay. We'll have a copy posted on our website for you in the next 2 days. So we count every single kid on September 1st. We count them again on October 1st. October 1st is our official count. That's the one we got paid off of, okay? So that one will be posted as well. How many preschool students we have, that's what preschool is. And then where this says on-site pre-K, that means they're actually in our buildings and not out in a private school. They're sitting in our buildings. So for each one of those, this next line, and this requires some explanation, says CEFP capacity. Basically, that is the SBA formula that says how many kids a school can hold. And remember I said that formula tends to inflate things. If I told you that this room could hold 300 people with 3 people across shoulder to shoulder standing in the aisles and crammed down here, maybe physically it could hold that many people. Would it be comfortable? Would it be functional? Probably not. So when you look at CEFP capacity, that's every room is a classroom and every room is slap full. So one of the things that we have done, so you see CEFP capacity and you see percentages right here. So basically, to do a very simple one, Jefferson High School has 1,597 kids in it. It holds 1,639. So it's at 97% capacity. If you've been in Jefferson High, you know whereof I speak. So then, when you look at this number, it says program capacity. And the reason we say that is any parents of elementary students here tonight, raise your hand. Elementary students tonight. So in every school that we have, every elementary and every middle school that we have here, we have a music room, we have an art room, and we have at least one computer lab for your child to get those services in. Right now, that's the way our schools are set up. So what we did is we said, okay, SBA, you say that the Blue Ridge campus, which is Blue Ridge Primary and Blue Ridge Elementary, can hold 902 kids. But if you actually have a music room, an art room, a computer lab, it can really only hold 827 because you have those rooms set aside for those things. Does that make sense? So when you look at program capacity over here, what we did is, here's how many seats we actually have in this building. Here's how many kids are going to school here. And so that final column that says percentage, that's what percent full the school is. We took the liberty of circling in red for you all the ones that are over 85%. So as you can see, there are some large numbers there. When you look at Shepherdstown Elementary School, and with those rooms, they can hold 435 kids, and they have 434. Guess what? They're full. So for each one of those, we went through and looked at all of the schools that are over what SBA would say is a functional capacity. We have other schools, as you'll see, where they're functioning in a very reasonable capacity or even lower. So as a school system, if you take every single seat in the house that we have, every single kid that we have all together, both K through 12 and preschool, we're 78% full. So, a couple of messages in that. Number one, we are not in a crisis situation. No one is being unserved in our schools. We are, however, growing, and as long as it takes to plan out land purchase and where to put a new school and how to grow, that is a 5-6 year process in some cases. We have to start planning now. We don't wait until we hit 85-90% and then do that. We start having a conversation now. The other piece of that is, as you can see, all of those numbers there aren't 78%. The population isn't evenly spread out across our school system. The growth has been in different areas. So to get to that point, we need to do some redistribution now, both to buy us some time before we have to build out again, and so that children have equitable educational experiences. Sitting in a school that's 100% full versus sitting in a school that's only 59% full is a very different experience for the kids and for the teachers. Okay. One of the things that has a pretty significant effect on this, and that we got a lot of questions about when we sent out information about student growth, has been the discussion about transfer. Jefferson County Schools has a very, very liberal transfer policy, meaning if you live one place, but you want your child to go to school someplace else, unless that school is completely maxed out, you can. We let you. I think what might be surprising to some people is that this past year, we pulled, and Mr. Blanc's office did a really nice job of going school by school, kid by kid, transfer in, transfer out in total numbers. And I think it was surprising to some folks to know that 5% of our entire school population transfers every year. They go to school someplace other than where they live. So, when you sit down and you are running a business with 1,200 employees and 9,207 kids that you have to transport, get safely, get all their supplies, get all their staff, get everything set, and you come to your trusty, handy-dandy little map of where everyone lives to figure out where they're going to go to school and what they need, and then you take 5% of that whole population and you just throw that to the wind, trust and believe that complicates things. So, there are, however, some very good social, ethical, moral reasons behind us doing transfers. Some of them are teachers who work with some stunningly low pay, far below what they deserve, and service personnel who come to work every day that feed our kids, drive our kids, make sure that they stay in safe schools, and part of what they earn is the privilege of their kid going to school with them. And that's something worth doing. We also have folks who, God bless them, I've done it before, they haul themselves up at 5 o'clock in the morning and get in a car and drag themselves an hour and a half someplace to go work and put food in their kids' stomachs and a roof over their head, and they need to be able to send their kid to a school next to the babysitter instead of the school where they live. However, it is a policy that needs to have some consideration because the bigger that we get, the more complex running a system this size and meeting everybody's needs gets. And us having very fair, very transparent, very clear rules of engagement about how we do that and the cost of doing that is important for us as a community. So some of these truly as well are myth busters because I got a lot of questions, a couple of folks sent questions before the forum about Jefferson High School and Washington High School, which are sort of the most visible disparities right now. And they said, well, you guys are, with all these transfers, you should just stop transfers and then we won't have to redistrict. Well, truthfully, the transfers aren't the issue. There's only 3 kids difference one way or the other in transferring between Jefferson and Washington and Jefferson. Okay? That's not really a huge issue for us. So we will have this up as well. We are also in the process, because we have to do it kid by kid, of the school they came out of and the school they went into, doing the ones for 2016, and we'll have that one done pretty soon as well. So we have some short-term and some long-term issues that we have to deal with. In the short term, one of our goals would be to have more equity in your capacity, meaning one school shouldn't be operating at 100%, every single classroom packed to the gills full, and another school at 56, 57. And that involves moving kids around, okay? The second one that we have is right now we are struggling with our transportation. We have a generous transportation system, and we have some of the finest, God love them. I went on a field trip to Harper's Ferry today with a group, and whoo, you couldn't pay me to drive a bus. Could not pay me to drive a bus. But as we've grown over time and added schools and our expectations and programs, extracurricular and swimming and track and national FFA competitions, we are running a very complex transportation system that we are better served if we can have kids in very linear feeder patterns where we're not running back and forth across the county. It saves us money, it saves us wear and tear, and it helps us with our staffing. So, a couple of other facts to know. Those are some short-term things. For some long-term things, we are going to eventually need more schools. We're going to need more land, we're going to need more schools, we're going to need more space for kids. That's simply a reality. Right now, in order for us to build the minimum that you need for an elementary, middle, and high school is 64 acres. Coming from a place that became much more developed, in 40 years, you're going to be hard-pressed to find a piece of land of 64 acres that you can build a school on. As places grow, the large swaths of land that you need for something as big as a school and the parking and the staff and the fields and the playgrounds, it gets harder and harder to find that. So the same way that someone sat in seats or seats like these 25, 50, 70 years ago, and they planned and bought and did so that your kids could go to school, your grandkids and their kids are going to need somebody to do that in the very near future so that they have a place to go to school, right? So I wanted to immediately come back from that because as soon as folks see that, it was like, ah! Okay, right now, we're not talking about going out next year and building a school. We don't have plans, we don't have land, and SBA, which is the School Building Authority, doesn't have any money. They pulled all of their projects this year for, quite frankly, a very good cause that we all support. We had a number of schools in West Virginia, as you know, that experienced some significant flooding. And they're all in on helping those communities get their schools back together. And we're just fine with that. So we have no pending projects for building in front of the SBA. I just want to be clear about what's immediate, what's short-term, and what's long-term. We talked about the optimal percentages. And one of the things to remember, right now, we're currently 4th in the state overall, 2nd in science, 4th in math, in academics. We have one of the top graduation rates in the state. The state's graduation rate is 86%, ours is 91%. It's higher than the country's, it's higher than the state's. You have a good academic program here, and what part of our responsibility is planning so that we can continue to have one and give people the tools that they need to be able to do this. So when we talk about what we're trying to do through this process, basically, we need to do some realignment with kids. We need to do it in ways that are effective for folks, get them within. Our goal would be within 10% of one another so that we have some equity across the division. Revise our transportation to be more efficient, and then have minimal impact on students as we go through this. Redistricting is traumatic. Building a new school or going out for bond is traumatic. So we don't want to do anything more than what we have to resolve the issue and work folks through it. So 1% is our annual growth rate. And I'm going to try to kick through these a little quicker. One of the things that we want to talk about as we're planning and going through this process is that when we talk about informational resources, we have a lot of data about where to expect to grow and when. So we're going to be able to use that to be as careful and thoughtful as we can about where to place students. This is a community participation process. Part of the reason we're having this conversation now is because when all of this is posted online, we will also be posting up and sending out a notice to parents and to our staff. If you are interested in participating in the committee to discuss these things, drop us a line, put in an application. We will then that committee will be making recommendations, and those recommendations will be going back out to the public. We will have additional public forums and public comment, and you'll have online comment to be able to give us feedback. And then that's all going to also involve realignment of our resources, possibly moving staff around, moving resources around. All of those things take time. The longer we put things off, the bigger the difference gets and the harder a problem it is to solve. So we're having this conversation now instead of 2 and 3 years from now, because that becomes wrenchingly painful. So I anticipate us and the committee making minor adjustments across a timeline. I don't think there will be one huge sweeping change and then we sit for another 10 years. We're growing too much from that. I think there'll be incremental changes over time. So when we're talking about time, what kind of timeline are we talking about? Oh, October, we have the public forum and we have the committees who come out and them meeting, reviewing the data, and in another month, coming out with a draft that they put out to the board and to the public for them to review. Then in November, spending another month in public review, rounds of public review, put it out, ask people for feedback, get their feedback on what they think about each one of those, and then take it back. December, 2 more weeks of public review, and then a presentation to the board in mid-December that says, we've come out with a recommendation, we've had several rounds of public comment, here's our recommendation for approval and implementation. Then in January, our staff starting the process of realigning resources. You can't move 100 kids from one place to another without moving teachers and books and desks and redoing transportation routes. And that's an enormous amount of work on our staff that we think will take a couple of months, but we think in March we'll have notifications out to people. Now, how many of you guys are actually Jefferson County Schools employees? Hallelujah. So please carry this message forth. We will not be, we have no intention of, there will not be. We are not riffing individuals. This process isn't about removing employees. We need more employees. Ask your friends to come drive a bus. That's all I got to say. So we have jobs. Kumbaya. Come to us. Okay? I've heard some crazy rumors. This isn't about losing jobs. This is actually about gaining jobs. We need more staff. We have more kids. What it is about, though, is as we've gotten more kids and, quite frankly, less money from the state, less money from impact fees, less money from table gaming, what we have to do is be efficient. We have to run the business side of a school system as efficiently as possible so that we have money to do the important part, which is the people. Those teachers, the bus drivers, the cooks, the custodians, the librarians, the mechanics, the maintenance folks. Those are the people who make life good for your children and who educate them and who build a community. So the better we are at not paying too much for gas on expensive transportation routes and cutting down on our paper use and making sure that we are really efficient with our building maintenance and not taxing our resources there, we save money for the people. That's the important part. Okay? So please, 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 if there's one thing you walk away with from here as a staff person, we may be moving folks around. Nobody's off the bus. You may have to switch seats on the bus, but nobody's off the bus. Okay? I might. You never know. You never know. Actually, we do need more drivers. Seriously, if anybody wants to drive a bus, we're ready for you. So what can you expect during this process? Just like this, information. This affects all of us. We all are in this together. This isn't a closed doors process. Now, trust and believe, we will not be having a 132-person committee. Okay? So everybody who puts their name in the hat is not going to come and sit down for 2 or 3 hours and pour through the maps. It's just not going to happen. But if you live in Jefferson, you will know the plan ahead of time. You will have several opportunities to voice your opinion about it, both in person and online, before we do anything, because it affects your life, so you have a voice in it. The next piece of this is, please trust and believe. Most of the people who raised their hands when they said JCS employees, guess what? They're also JCS parents. We all have kids who are going to be affected by this too. It is traumatic. We're here to help a community as they grow, not to pull things apart. We are going to be very consistent in this process. These kinds of things, and for some folks, ooh, you're a numbers person, Dr. Gibson. What about the human side of things? What about the people's stories? I appreciate that, and we're going to look at both. But at the end of the day, no one group of folks, no one subdivision, no one income group, no one group of folks is going to take precedence over another. It's going to be a fair process, and it's going to be driven by the data. That's the kind of school system that we are. Change is scary. True, trust me, I get it. It's been a message. It is scary because you fear what you might have to lose. But we do have a lot to gain, too. There are things, and I'll be the first to admit this, all due respect, there are things that we don't do well. There's things we could do a heck of a lot better as a school system. And sometimes we are so darn busy chasing our tails on things that we don't do well that we don't make as much progress for your kids as we could. So if we've got a chance to improve our process and to get better, then we're going to try to take that. So I'm going to run through these. Those were all the good things about bus driving routes, GPS trackers, things like that. So outcome-wise, what we expect is process. We expect you to be involved, informed, respected, and for your opinion to count through these. So for those of you who have questions for this evening, if you'll hold up your cards, Ralph, Sandy, Pat will pick up all of your cards. We'll answer questions. From here, this presentation, all of these charts, and a link for you to volunteer to serve on the committee will be on our website before close of business on Friday. And just like I sent you a school messenger to come to this, I'll send you another school messenger with the link so that you can look at everything. And then each step of the process, we'll keep you notified as we go through, because I want to honor anybody's time. So anybody that has questions on your index cards, raise those up, and then if you guys could bring those to me. Let me anticipate a question while they're working their way up here. One of the questions that I got early on, quite frankly, was about ROTC. Ha ha ha! I see my clairvoyance is kicking in. And we currently have, there's been several questions about ROTC. Number one, we have exactly 52 kids who go from Washington, they're zoned for Washington, yet they attend ROTC at Jefferson. ROTC has over 200 kids in it. 52 of them are Washington kids. There's more than 400 kids difference between Jefferson and Washington. It's not ROTC. Second of all, we did have a conversation with the amazingly talented Major Sudam. And currently, we cannot create a comparable program at Washington High School. There are certain rules that the Air Force has in place about ROTC and how many they can have in a state and how you propagate them within counties that don't allow us to do that. We have approached the other branches about opening up a program at Washington High School. The only other branch that had the capacity and the willingness to was the National Guard. Their program, however, is very different in that the Air Force program, we share costs. The Air Force supports that program fiscally. We match them, but they have heavy support for that program fiscally. The National Guard program would offer us no fiscal support whatsoever. Any teachers or materials or supplies or uniforms or anything that we bought, we'd have to do completely out of pocket. And after cutting over $700,000 last year, in my first year, it wasn't something that we could take on at that time. So again, ROTC, that's a big question, it's a big program, and it is a model program, and it is a joy, and it's wonderful, but there are limitations that keep us from moving it over to Washington. So you got some more questions for me? Okay, this question is, what planning is on the books for new schools, high school, middle, elementary? Fantastic. Great question. So number one, you might be asking yourself, how would Dr. Gibson have known that 64 acres is exactly the minimum that she needed, unless maybe she was doing some work for the board, some planning. So the board actually, although you probably haven't seen it as much, they have been in a process since last December of both searching for and vetting pieces of land for growth. It is quite a process. Number one, they have to be of a certain size. Number two, they have to meet certain criteria because getting a bag of dog food for 50% off is awesome if you have a dog. So getting a piece of land really cheap is awesome until you find out you have to put $2 million into it to build to build caissons underneath it to hold the school up. So here's the thing. They are in the process of vetting pieces of land for future growth. That is, understandably, for your protection, a process that takes place in closed session so that there's not speculation and people driving land prices up for the public. They've been very careful about it, they've been very thoughtful about it, and they have done, quite frankly, a remarkable amount of due diligence on geothermal and making sure that whatever they get, it's the best price and it's the best place for school. But they are in the middle of that process. They're working through it, and there should be, there'll be a notice when that occurs. How's that? But of the three of them, the next anticipated level at which we will need a school is elementary. Now, when you looked at that chart, you might say, well, the high schools are the most crowded. But here's the thing. When you get 100 kids over on a high school, you don't build another high school. You don't build a whole other high school for 100 kids. You have to get much further over capacity for a high school to build a new high school, because that's just a big number. That's another 1,600 kids. Elementary, you get 200 kids over at the elementary level, and you're about ready for another school. So the threshold for elementary schools in terms of numbers is lower. So we'll build it. Probably the next one will be in elementary. Truthfully, the place where we're the best right now in terms of capacity is middle school. A big piece of that is Harper's Ferry, that renovation and adding all the classes to that, and the fact that 3 out of your 4 middle schools used to be high schools, hold a lot of kids. So we're good at middle school. So elementary, high school, middle school is probably the logical order, but we take those numbers every year and look at that growth. What you got? So, will this proposed redistricting actually happen during this 2016-17 school year or start for 17-18? Brilliant question. The planning will all occur during this year. We will not move a single kid, a single employee, a single bus route until 2017-18. I am a big believer in advance notice, and it seems to catch some people off guard because every time I come up with something, they're like, are we doing that tomorrow? No, we're planning on doing that in 9 months. That's why I'm telling you now. So, no, all of this is an entire year-long planning process for 17-18, and quite frankly, beyond 17-18. Because, let's take an example, Washington, Jefferson. Anybody here a Cougar? Anybody here Jefferson Cougar? Raise your hand. Whoo! I would no more try to turn you into a Patriot. I personally am an Oakland Raiders fan. If someone came to me to try to turn me into a New England Patriot, it would be ugly for everyone involved. So, if you have a child this year and they're a junior at Jefferson High School and they're going to become a senior next year, you spent 3 years of your life as a Cougar? Okay, gradual, all right? There's nothing that says, remember, the reason we plan long and hard and talk about it ahead is so we don't get into a crisis and have to hurt people. So, it may be, and this will be a committee's recommendation to the board, a 2-year realignment. You know, we move freshmen and sophomores 17-18. We move the next year 18-19, the next incoming class, and then everybody's done. Does that make sense? So to the extent that we can, the very first of anything will happen in 17-18 as far as moving kids or moving resources. But it may be a longer process than that to keep from gut-wrenching people. And God forbid if any of you had bought all of that Cougar gear and you had to go out and buy red, white, and blue, and it'd be tragic. I would hear about it. Okay, who is sitting on the committee analyzing the data, preparing for public review? When are you signing up? That's a great question. We have some internal staff people who are sitting on the committee as workhorses. Larry Willingham, love of my life. Okay, let me just tell you, The word workhorse and Larry Willingham in the same sentence is very appropriate. So if you don't know Larry Willingham, he works for our Department of Transportation, and he runs our VersaTrans program, which is the electronic program that helps us plan out routes, GPS routing for our buses. He will be on the committee because he knows all these routes and all these things. Patrick Blanc, who's the Assistant Superintendent for Instruction, will be on the committee for moving these folks around. The Jefferson Planning Commission has a couple of Todd Fagans, a couple of their staff people have offered to be on here for technical support and do this. We will also, however, have parent representatives, service personnel rep, teacher rep, admin rep. We'll have representation for those on this committee so that it's representative of everyone's viewpoints when it comes out. And as I said, that application will be up online before close of business on Friday. When you say equitable distribution among schools, will that actually include class size? The size percentage is great, but there are different amounts of teachers. That maybe came from a staff person, because that's a very insightful question. So Jefferson County Schools doesn't set class sizes for K through 6. The state sets those, and we have no choice whatsoever. You come to me and you say, but I've lived in Shepherdstown all my life. I know it says only 23 kids. Can you just take one more? I'll pay you. We can't. However, in grades 7 through 12, we have some more flexibility about that. When I say equitable distribution, number 1, yes, the students, but number 2, yes, moving the staff so that their ratios aren't that different. We have a staffing chart, and I didn't put it up there, but we have a staffing chart both for general education and special education that we share with the principals because God love them, they never think we give them enough staff, and they're right, we don't, but so that they see, hey, I'm over here at, let's write Denny, Mr. Walter, let's take that for example, and I have one special education teacher for every 8.7 students. Oh, look, the Jefferson County Schools average is 1 for every 9.5. I'm pretty close. I'm in the same boat as everybody else. So we keep those staffing charts for every single school, for self-contained, for special ed, for general ed, and what we do is we try to keep them within a range so that one school doesn't have 35 kids in a class and another one has 16. Part of the problem with these changes is that it's hard when the population is so different. When you have a school like North Jefferson that has a very small population, then you may end up with some classes with 16, 17 kids in it if the max is 25, and I have to split them out. I can't put them all in one place. Whereas at other schools, they have 25. So us evening out the distribution of that will help us even out the distribution of teachers too. Whew, getting tired of hearing myself talk. If a child is involved in a sport or band and they have to redistrict, will they be permitted to stay? That's a great question. That's a great question. That's why we do these. I would imagine, and I don't know the exact rule myself, but sports here are governed by WVASSA. Like they have or WVSSA, I never say it right. But there's an organization that the state has for sports and where you qualify to play, and they have rules about being able to switch schools. That is a great point, and note to self, we'll have that, that packet for the committee when they make those considerations. That's a great point. That's a great point. So within the rules that the state sets, we won't jeopardize someone's scholarship capabilities or their capability to play for teams doing that. Do the ROTC kids that fall out transfer back to Washington? Why weren't those 52 accounted for in the transfer numbers? Okay, so transfer is your parent comes in and says, I live here, I want my kid to go to school here. ROTC kids, they're in that program, they're actually enrolled at Jefferson. Those kids are going straight there. If kids, for transfers, if you transfer and your rationale for transfer or the rules for transfer aren't met, You have a significant discipline problem. You've charged $800 worth of free lunch and you haven't paid for it. At the end of the year, we go through those and the principals exchange lists with each other and we send those parents a notice. Your reason for transfer is no longer valid, or you didn't follow our rules for transfer, you're going to transfer back. Those are unpleasant conversations because parents have a difficult time with those. But if we let you transfer and we said no discipline, no truancy, and you do those things, then we place you back where you came from. It's a right, it's a privilege, not a right. So, okay, will you take into consideration the students who have moved schools multiple times? Did you write this, Ms. Ogden? Will you take into, I laugh because Ms. Ogden's children have been redistricted 4 times. So will you take into consideration the students who have moved schools multiple times, i.e. elementary, middle, and now possibly high school? That is a great question. That's a great question. We have that information about which places transferred. We did not, only because just didn't think of it. It's not because the GIS, the Planning Commission doesn't have that in their system, so it's not included in this map, but it is information that we could use if we know one subdivision. If we sit down and Ralph and Larry are like, we've moved them 5 times, let's not do this again, then the committee should certainly take that into consideration. Yeah. Okay, do we got time for one more, or are we good? Okay, how about the very last one? Have you considered more magnet programs at Washington High School, like television, drama, dance, and IT? That's a great question. There are a couple of magnet programs at Washington High, including a great teaching program, and I don't know where, there he is, and the magnificent Rob Perks, who runs a television program up there that has doubled in size in the last year. We can't keep enough spaces at it. Yes, we have had those discussions. Some of this process is about physical things, about spaces and seats and desks, and some of this process, honestly, is going to be about philosophical things, about programs and about who we are as a system moving forward and how we grow. And I don't expect every single one of those to get resolved out of one committee. I do expect it to be more of a process that we iterate over several years. So for any of the questions that, just because I want to be respectful of your time, any of your questions that didn't get answered, we've got all the cards. We're going to type up like a Q&A and put it up with these so that it'll be up on the website as well. And you guys will all be able to go on, and I will stay here for the next, 20, 30 minutes until my son passes out in the corner and answer individual questions. But I do thank you very much for coming tonight, for being involved enough and caring about your system, and thank you. Thanks a lot. I appreciate it.